Okay, I think now you're on. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first session of Jornada de Estudos Linguísticos, JEL, the annual conference of the graduate program of Language Studies of Universidade Federal Fluminense in Niterói, Brazil. I'm Luciana Sanchez Mendes. I'm a professor of the program, and I would like to thank you all for being here for this session called Theoretical Issues and Linguistic Diversity. On behalf of the organizing committee of JEL, I especially thank the professors invited for this session. But first, I'd like to apologize for the absence of Professor Marco Antonio Martins. Professor Martins kindly accepted our early invitation, but unfortunately, he could not attend the session today. So today we have a session with international guests. First, I'm going to introduce you Professor Enoch Abba. He's a professor at University of Amsterdam. His research is focused on learnability of human language with a special focus on theoretical syntax, comparative syntax, discourse syntax interface, language creation, and language change. This year, he gave a wonderful talk on universal multilingualism at Abralim ao Vivo, an event sponsored by Associação Brasileira de Linguística. Those who did not watch it can access it on the Abralim page on YouTube. You are going to start with his talk today. So thank you very much, Professor Abba, for accepting our invitation and for being here today with us. I will conduct the discussion after the talks. You can leave your questions and comments on the chat. E vocês podem fazer perguntas em português também, que eu posso tentar traduzir para os convidados. I hope you all enjoyed the talks this afternoon and the discussions of this session. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thanks for a very nice introduction. And thanks for inviting me to this important event and for allowing me to share some of my findings, some of my thoughts with you, and also learn from you, from your questions. I'm really grateful to you for putting me in this context where we can share our thoughts. I will now try to share my screen with you and see whether everything works correctly. Can you see my screen now? I need someone to respond because I cannot hear you and I don't know whether you can see my screen or not. Let me see. Can the organizers actually give me a signal that you can see my screen? This is so I was
Professor, yes, I'm back here. Yeah, we can see you can start. It's really fine.
Okay, yeah, okay. Thank you very much. So let me go back. Now it's loading. Yeah, we have to rely on the technology and it's not always, yeah. So now basically what I will be talking about today has to do with my work on comparative syntax and what we learned from comparative syntax and whether some of our findings in African languages are actually taken up in formal syntax. So the question of the talk already tells you my feeling, which you will see in the end, basically consists in saying that maybe we are not learning enough from the African languages, or maybe we are not actually pushing uh, to the right level the findings that we are sort of gathering from those languages. And in order to do that, I will walk you through. Well, now there is something wrong with my uh, PowerPoint, which is not, I cannot move. This is really strange. So I'll need your help again. So basically, I cannot move I cannot navigate in the PowerPoint. So it's really strange what's happening. So I have the PowerPoint on, but I cannot navigate. It's stuck on the first page.
Oh,
It's stuck on the first.
maybe you can try to quit it and start again.
Yeah. So let me do this again. Stop sharing. Okay. Okay, so now it's working. So what I would like to do then is, in order to walk you through this discussion, talk about formal features in formal linguistics. And then I will talk about what counts as formal features, or what we mean when we talk about formal features. Then I will show that in some cases, the formal features that we talk about don't have any morphological exponent in some languages. And then the question comes, what we can do with these formal features in those languages. And then I'll move on to show that in these languages, something else happens. So here I'm using the title, When Your Grammar Sings, and you'll see why I'm talking about that. And then I'll move back to a part of my work, which has to do with discourse syntax interface, where we see that in some languages, discourse particles play an important role in grammar. And I'll raise the question how we account for those particles in grammar. And then I'll come back to the notion of formal feature, suggesting that we have to broaden our notion of formal feature. So what do we mean by formal features? Formal features in formal linguistics are features that we refer to as 5 features, for example, person features, number or gender features, case features, or tense features. And these play a very important role in formal syntax. So if you take the French example that you have under one, the sentence les mangues que j'ai acheté, if you look at the gloss and you follow my pointer, you see that the determiner has a morpheme that indicates plural. And this plural morpheme is sort of repeated or mentioned again on the noun, and you find it here. And you see the same thing happening between the pronoun, the first person pronoun, and the auxiliary, which has the same kind of indication. So this auxiliary here has a form that shows that it is first person pronoun, first person singular, by the way. And then you see that there is an agreement between the head noun here, which is the head of the relative clause, and the past participle here, which actually has feminine marking and number marking. So in French, these 5 features and formal features play a very important role in terms of agreement between the heads and the dependents. And this is exactly what we see here. And the idea in formal syntax is that these formal features sort of manifest themselves in different configurations. One configuration being the head versus complement kind of configuration. So you have a head that takes a complement, and the two agree somehow, and the formal features manifest themselves in this agreement pattern. In some other cases, you have specifier head agreement patterns. And again, you see the formal features manifesting themselves. And one example that I just talked about is the long distance kind of agreement that we saw here, where we see an agreement between a noun that is sitting to the far left of the clause and a past participle which is sitting to the far right of the clause. And you have agreement between these two things. And that's an instance of long distance agreement. So these formal features are very important to capture these type of agreements that we find robustly in Romance and Germanic languages. So the idea is that what counts as formal feature in formal syntax is derived from studies on Indo-European, but primarily, and you could see from the example that I just gave, from Romance and Germanic languages, and to some extent from Slavic languages. And this is assumed to form a finite set, which will include person, number, gender, case features, and tense features. And some authors, it depends, add definiteness. And I'll come back to definiteness by the end of the talk. So these features are typically involved, as I just shown, in agreement patterns between the heads and the dependents, or between the predicates and the arguments. And as such, these formal features are necessary ingredients for probe-goal relations. So the relations between, again, the head and the dependents, or the active, syntactically active element, which is probing to search for the relevant element that will be licensed under its, let's say, scope, for example. And so they play important role in formalizations of agree as a formal kind of operation, or feature evaluation, or feature checking, right? And one important property of these formal features is that when they are present in the clause, or when they are present in the utterance, they have to be satisfied. They have to be licensed. So their presence triggers obligatory syntactic operation, basically. So the interim conclusion here is that human languages involve these formal features, but keep in mind that in terms of human language, I've just shown you one example on French, right? So they involve these formal features at the core agreement, relations. And the formal features appear to form a finite set. I gave you a couple of examples of this finite set. And they are context independent. So when they are present, they have to be licensed. It's not optional. You cannot just say, oh yeah, there is a formal feature here, but we license the feature if we want. They have to be licensed if they are present. Now, at this point already, you may start, if we're talking about diversity, you may already start thinking of a number of questions. And you may want to ask whether it is just an accident that these features that I've just shown you are very robust in most studied languages, which in formal linguistics are mainly Romance and Germanic languages. And then you may also want to wonder whether there is a sort of mysterious relation here between these features that we talk about so often and the European expansion of the 16th and 19th century. And here it's not an accident that the languages that are studied are mainly the Romance and Germanic languages. And when you think about the European expansion and you think about the languages that expanded in the world, and of course, these are also the two languages that you find, right? So what we call in Creole studies, the big five, depending on how you look at it. So it will be like, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, and English, right? So there might actually be something happening there which has nothing to do with the properties of languages per se. And then a third question that you might want to ask yourself is, what do we do about languages where we don't see any manifestation of these formal features? I gave you an example in French where it was clear that these formal features have morphological exponents. But of course, there are many languages in which you don't see any such morphological exponent. And Gungbe, my father's tongue, is one of such languages. So in Gungbe, there is no number or gender or noun kind of morphology. And you don't see any agreement patterns. So the first example, which is on the 3, is just a translation of the French example that I gave you, the mangoes that I bought. And what you see in Gungwe is that you say manga de unholole. And there is no agreement morphology. There is nothing actually. So you only see, the different parts of the sentence being realized, and there is no inflectional or morphological manifestation of whether they relate to each other somehow. Okay, and here I would also want to draw your attention to the fact that there is a mysterious kind of interest from, let's say, the former, colonial kind of countries on African languages, which is heavily focused on Bantu languages. And here there is no accident that the interest from, let's say, the former colonial powers lies on Bantu languages, because Bantu languages have the properties that are just shown for French. They show these formal features being expressed morphologically. But Bantu languages, even though they represent a sizable size of Africa, there are many other language types in Africa, especially the Kwa languages, for which you don't see these formal features being morphologically realized. So the question there again is, the bias that you find on African studies toward Bantu languages is just a bias that is already there toward Romance and German languages. And it's good to keep these things in mind. So under example 4, I'm just showing that even though, the noun here is a plural, it has exactly the same form as the singular form, and nothing else happens even if you add adjectives, numerals or demonstratives, right? So basically what you do in this language is basically it's as if you were doing Lego kind of play. You just put the elements together. They have relations that are established between them, but you don't see these relations overtly, right? So heads of phrases in Gungbe, so nouns, verbs, adjectives, don't show any morphological expression of the typical formal features that we talked about. And another example here, just to complete the kind of picture, is given to you to show that even when you have a verb, because we are talking about nouns and their dependent, now when you have verbs and their arguments, you get the same thing. There is no morphological manifestation of the formal features. So under example 5, we have manga daho awe ehelole flejeta jinami. So where you see that manga has exactly the same form. By the way, this is a borrowing from Portuguese, which we have in Gungwe. That tells you something about contact and diversity. And then you have daho, big, awe, tu, ehe, these. Then you have some kind of specificity marker and the plural marker. So manga is actually plural, but the verb is still bare. There is no manifestation of subject-verb agreement here in this language. And the same goes for 6, where manga is singular in this case. So you see that the number is not there anymore. We only have the specificity marker, and the verb is still showing up with the same form. So the conclusion here is that in these languages, the verbs are always bare, just as nouns are always bare. Okay. Having said that, it is important to keep in mind that we do see a residual manifestation of formal features in some pronominal forms. So you see here the accusative form is me, whereas the nominative form in Gungwe is So there is a contrast between nominative form and accusative form me. But that's about it. That's the only manifestation of formal features that you find in these languages. So when you're confronted with this kind of languages and you're doing formal syntax, then the question comes, how do we deal with these languages? Because we don't see any of the other properties that we talk about when we're studying Portuguese, Spanish, French, or English. And here what we do, and I think this is exactly what we should be doing, so this is not a criticism, what we do is that we assume Chomsky's uniformity principle, which basically says, in the absence of compelling evidence to the contrary, assume language to be uniform, with variety restricted to easily detectable properties of utterances. What this means is that the human cognitive capacity that process language is the same, whether you're a Gungbe speaker or whether you're an English speaker. And because we know that some properties can be silent in syntax, the fact that Gungbe doesn't use or doesn't express those properties with morphological manifestation shouldn't push us to say Gungbe is fundamentally different from English. So I will be assuming the uniformity principle. What I will be pushing for is that we need to push this to its logical end, which is when we find things in Gungbe which we don't find in English, then we should be ready to assume that the same things happen in English, even though we don't see them in English. And that's what I will be pushing for. So what we do in syntax, comparative syntax working on Gungbe is actually to say that Gungbe and such languages share similar formal features and their related licensing configurations as other languages, but only silently. So the interim conclusion here is that the traditional inflectional morphology typical of formal features are non-existent in Gungbe. But then we do postulate that such features are silent. It's not the case that languages lack those features. What the languages will lack will be a morphological exponence of those features, right? So the context-free formal features that we've seen for French and for English and for so many other languages on Earth are also operative in Gungbe. They are only operative in a silent manner. And I'll say this is the case for Gungbe, but also for Kwa languages. But then the question is, how silent is Gungbe in the end, right? So I've been saying these languages don't have these four features, and that could be, you could assume that they don't have them at all. But there is another possibility, which is that they might actually have these formal features, but these formal features only show up differently in these languages. And maybe as linguists, we are not paying, the correct or the right attention to these other ways of expressing formal features. And my, kind of take here is that we should be careful about these other ways of expressing formal features. And in order to show that, I will, invite you to consider what we call, phonologists actually call downdrift in languages. And Gungbe is a language that has downdrift. And downdrift is a system whereby you start with a high register and systematically you lower your register such that by the end of the utterance, the register is lower than where you started. So I will pronounce this sentence to sort of illustrate this. So this sentence in Gungbe sounds like this. Ovino chiovilo eyinake dagbe. And then I'll whistle this for you to really hear what I'm trying to say. You can clearly hear the high register at the beginning of the sentence and the low register at the end of the sentence. And Gungbe is organized systematically around this property. And of course, what people usually do is that they talk about this property and they think, well, it's just a phonological thing. And the point that I would like to push here is that actually it goes beyond phonology. It's actually part of the syntax of this language. And this starts with a work by Annie Frechet, who studied downdrift in Gungbe. And she said, the downdrift in Gungbe matches with syntactic structure and functions like a system of punctuation aiming at including different lexemes in it. And she gave this wonderful representation of how the tones sort of get together in the sentence that I just pronounced. And you can see how the tones, so this is a low tone, this is a high tone, so how they combine to form tonal units, which are actually units that are complex. So the tonal units behave like syntactic units. And when you draw the syntactic tree of this sentence, of the same sentence, you see exactly the way these tonemes are arranged. So I will whistle this again for you to follow. Right? So what you see here is that, this syntactic unit has this kind of tonal phrasing, which is different from the tonal phrasing of this unit here, but you can already see that this unit here is a head, and this is the complement. Then we have the subject here, which has another tone unit, but it's lower than the one that is here. And then you have here the verb phrase, which contains the verb and the complement. And we have a proposed morpheme, which takes the verb phrase as complement. So in the end, you see that the tone kind of system is telling you something about the syntactic organization of the structure that we just pronounced. So what we see here is that apparently FHS description essentially results from syntactic configurations. So the phrasal tones whose effects actually translate into prosody. So what we want to assume now is that phrasal tones emerge from syntactic configurations. So they are not just phonological properties that you get because of intonation. They're actually syntactic properties that trigger these phonological processes that you have. Okay, and this has been sort of, in a sense, suggested already by work by Rosemary Dechaine, who worked on Yoruba. And what Rosemary Dechaine showed is that Yoruba has this interesting property of verbs when you have tone shift on verbs. And what she showed is that monosyllabic verbs with low tone raise to mid tone when followed by an accusative marked DP. And the verbs with mid and high tone retain their tones. So these examples here just illustrate the point that I just made. So this verb here, which is mo, is normally low tone in citation form. But when you realize this verb in a sentence that has a direct object, then it goes to mid-tone. Okay? So you get something like momoilere, right? Now, verbs with mid-tone and high tone just retain their, let's say, citation form. So nothing changes here. Then she showed that when you're dealing, so the first, this slide only has to do with DP, accusative complements, right? So noun phrases which are accusative case. She showed that when you're dealing with complement clauses for which it's not obvious that they need accusative case, then you see something interesting happening. So the tone shifts here is realized as mid or low, but then you get a difference in meaning. So she showed that in this case, where you have a low tone on the same lexical verb that we talked, so when you have the low tone, the meaning that you have of the expected complement is something like, I know that we need that. So I know that we need something, okay? But when you actually have the mid tone instead of the low tone that we had in example A, then the meaning is that of something that looks more like a pseudo cleft, where you have what I know is that we need this thing. Okay? So the conclusion here is straightforward, right? So the tone shift is sensitive to syntactic categories. So we have an opposition between noun phrases and sentential complements. And it affects meaning. And by this kind of token, we have to conclude that it is not a mere prosodic effect. It's clearly something that has to do with syntax. And Dechaine's analysis shows this clearly. I will not get into the details of the analysis, but basically what she shows is that the tone shift is a property of a case functional projection, which determines the case on a noun phrase. But of course, because complement clauses don't need case, then when this projection takes as a complement a clause, then you get the shift that we just talked about with semantic effects. So you get two different meanings. For the purpose of this talk, it seems to me that when we put Gunge and Yoruba together, and actually these two languages stand as examples for something that you find quite robustly in choir languages, we can conclude that these languages involve grammatical tonemes whose presence in a clause translates into various prosodic patterns. So the lesson that we're learning from these languages, and that we should be pushing beyond these languages, is that inflectional properties must not be reduced to the European type, so the Romance and Germanic or Slavic type of inflectional morphology, which reduces to affixal distinctions. We have to understand inflectional properties also in terms of tones. So tones can be inflectional, as this shown, by a huge amount of literature in Congo languages. But once you do that, then you get a number of such questions which are very interesting and which should be investigated. What is the categorical status of a tone, of an inflectional tone? How do we know that in syntax? What theory of morphology applies to inflectional tones since they are not affixes, right? And I think, answering these two questions will not only be important for, getting a better knowledge of what we mean inflection or derision when we're talking about these, categories cross-linguistically, but, answering these two questions will also help us address a very interesting question, which has to do with non-manuals in sign languages. Non-manuals in sign languages are, let's say, linguistic properties which are not signed, but they are part of the expression, and there could be facial expressions, there could be body lean, many other components of the utterance which are not signed, right? So, and these, of course, in a sense, could be assimilated to tones, and researchers have mentioned this, parallel between non-manuals in sign languages and tones in many kind of papers already. So there is an interesting issue there that needs to be solved. So we've already seen that in these languages, the expression of inflectional, let's say, specification is not being done by affixal elements, but arguably by tones. And interestingly enough, tones also play a role in discourse syntax interface. So in Gungbe, for example, the formation of a yes/no question builds heavily on a low tone. So what you see in this example here is that in Fongbe and Gungbe are two closely related languages. You can say something like Kofiwa, and in both languages it means something like Kofi came. But in Gungbe, if you want to ask a question, has Kofi come, you have to say something like Kofi wa. So you have to lower, your intonation in final position. And you can see that, there is a direct relation between this low tone here and the question particle that we actually do find in Fongbe, where you have to say Kofi wa a. And that's really different from Kofi wa, right? So the analogy here, or the analysis here, is that in Gungbe, the floating low tone that we have actually corresponds to the question particle that shows up as a in Fongbe. By the way, other Bay languages have other question particles like o or o, right? So the a in Fongbe is just an accident in this case. So, sorry. So keep this in mind. And now let's look at other properties of, let's say, the closal left periphery, which are important for information structure. And what we see here is that under 10, it's not just that these languages mark, let's say, questions with particles, but they also mark focus with particles. So 10, has a focus marker, which is where. So you say, now we lower ni gamiton. The woman is our chief, and you're putting the woman into focus. In 11, we have a topic marker, which is ya. So you say suruya, asieton waini gamiton. And so here you see that the topic marker, which is here, can co-occur with the focus marker. And when they co-occur, the topic marker has to be the focus marker. So this is the that you find here. So what we have now is that these languages have question particles, they have topic markers, and they have focus markers. What is interesting is that, in these two examples that I gave to you here, the topic and the focus markers occur to the left of the sentence, right? So you have suruya, asietonwe, and then you have the rest of the sentence. And that's the position in which you find them quite often. But in some cases, the topic marker and the focus marker have scope over the sentence, the whole clause. And when that happens, these elements occur to the right of the clause. But the crucial point here is that they occur in the mirror image of the image that you have when they occur to the left. So to the left, you have topic preceding focus. When they occur to the right, you have focus preceding topic. And then you have the question particle following. So what we see here is that these questions, this question particle and the other discourse particles are not only active in syntax, but they actually trigger a number of word order patterns. And that's what I would like to illustrate now. So in my previous work, and I don't want to get into the details here, I've shown following Luigi Riset's work that when we look at the left periphery of these languages, we have a position for interrogative, we have a position for topic, and we have a position for focus. And what I've shown is that in a sentence where with all these particles to the end of the sentence, what happens in these languages is that you actually take the whole sentence, you move it up to the left of the focus particle, which then shows up, to the right. You take this new thing that you formed, which you move to the left of the topic particle, which then shows up to the right. And then you take the whole thing, which you move up to the left of the interrogative marker, which then again shows up to the right. And what you see is that when you do that, these things show up in the mirror image that they have here. So here they have a ya, where, right? But when you do this, then you get where, ya, plus question particle. Okay? And this is what I call the snowballing movement in my previous work. So the fact that you start with something that's small here, then you start rolling up, and it gives you an effect of snowball, right? So what we have now as an interim conclusion, is that these discourse particles trigger movement operation, including this snowballing movement that I just talked about. And there is a huge cross-linguistic evidence from Kwa and Bantu and other Niger-Congo languages, which really shows that these languages allow this kind of snowball movement. And we then need to understand what the property of this snowballing movement are and what kind of formal characterization we want to postulate for this kind of movement. And this is the question I'm asking here. What is the formal status of such movements cross-linguistically, right? What triggers this kind of snowballing movements? Okay, and there are further consequences for for our understanding of grammar and how we can push these ways of doing things forward, because tone morphemes are not specific, to African languages. Usually people think, oh yeah, this is something that you find in African languages. You will find a tool to solve that in African languages, but then we continue business as usual for Indo-European languages. And my, suggestion here that we should change this perspective, because when you look at French is just doing what Gumbe is doing, in a sense that yes, no question in French require this lowering. So you say Pierre est venu, this rising, sorry. So in the declarative, you have a lowering, like in 15a. So Pierre est venu, where it goes down. But in a yes, no question, you have to have a rising. So you have to say Pierre est venu, right? And if you use a syntactic kind of strategy with clinic inversion, you still get Pierre a-t-il mangé? You still get the rising. So if you use the est-ce que kind of strategy, est-ce que Pierre a mangé? You still get the rising, right? And so what De Cristo actually suggests is that all these three strategies involve this final rise, suggesting that you can actually get rid of, the syntactic, properties that we have here, and you will still get your question. And this is exactly what you get in the 15b, right? So how are we going to account for this? The traditional approach is to basically say this is prosody. But because we know what's happening in these African languages, and because we now know that there are tonemes which trigger this kind of operation, we can actually treat French the way we treat Gumbe, by basically saying French actually has a high toneme in interrogative, and French is doing exactly the same syntactic mechanism that Gumbe uses, that is raising the whole sentence to the left of the question particle, and you get this rising in sentence final position. So As further consequences, we want to say that a subset of prosodic phenomena that are commonly attributed to intonation, especially in the domain of information structure, are properties of tonemes with specific syntactic requirements that impact phonology. And then that gets us back to formal features, and this will be, my last slide, or maybe the one before last. So the formal features that we talked about, features that enter probe-goal relations and trigger syntactic operations, cannot be limited to person, number, gender, case features, and tense features, and definiteness. We have to think about the features that I just talked about, which are definiteness, discourse features that I just talked about, and we have to think about other ways of these features to be manifested in languages than affixal properties. And I've pushed this way of looking at things in a previous paper of mine where I show that actually discourse-related features in information structure are active in syntax. So the lesson that we should be learning from these African languages, so the study of these African languages should be that they indicate that we must improve our toolkit for syntactic analysis and fine-tune fundamental aspects of syntactic theory, morphology, and semantics. And the question now that I'm putting on the table is whether we are ready to learn more from these languages and then ready to change our ways of looking at certain fundamental aspects of our theory. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk, Professor Abo. It was wonderful. Yeah, we are looking forward to look to different languages. I now open for questions for the audience. I hope someone. I wait some minutes to the questions for you, but when they are think about it, I would I have a question on sign languages, because you put like just short part, because I was wondering about this this relation between tone and syntax, and there's a, and they have a impact on semantics as well, and word order, all the structure of the language, and it's harder to check this kind of aspects in sign languages. Could you talk a little bit on how can we start looking at it? We have in vocal languages just supra-segmental clues, but what about sign languages? I'm really curious about it.
So about sign languages, as I said, people have already been looking at this. And of course, I think we are stuck both in sign languages and in tone languages because we haven't reached a point where we will really take these, let's say, tonemes as expressions of formal features, as I'm sort of pushing here. So in sign languages, what people have been looking at are exactly the non-manuals, right? So in sign languages, you use signs, which you sort of sign with your hands. But when you say something in sign languages, it's not only a combination of signs. It's actually a combination of signs and non-manuals like eyebrows, the form of your mouth, the way your head tilts. And these, of course, in a sense, behave like super segmentals, right? Mm-hmm. So because they don't seem to be attached to anything, even though they sometimes coincide with, the way you sign, right? So what we need to investigate here is, on one hand, how tones actually coincide with, precise syntactic positions, right? And once we do that, because spoken languages allow us to have a good analysis of this, then we can sort of extend this to sign languages. And then we can try to see, body lean, head tilt, when does the head tilt start and where does it stop? And the same goes for tone spreading, right? So we know about tone spreading in languages. We know that tone shifts positions. So we can use the same tools to actually analyze sign languages. Right now, we cannot do that simply because we haven't been looking at tones, from the perspective that I'm pushing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was I was thinking. Just let me see if we have more questions here
Yeah.
on the chat. You know that we have a delay between the talk here in StreamYard and the YouTube, so maybe they are still
Okay.
paying attention at you. And so let's give them some minutes to.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't know that. I didn't know about the delay.
Yeah, it's just a few minutes.
Okay.
We can follow here on comments. We have private chat and also comments here.
Oh, yeah. So the comments. Oh, yeah. I see there's many comments. Yeah, but most of them are okay.
Okay, I can maybe just one more small
Yeah.
question and then
Yeah.
we can finish. I was uh, I was trying to follow uh, the your talk between I was checking on Ricardo Maldonado, but
Yeah.
I was wondering about the movement on to the you have the left periphery.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm very interested in syntax, synthetic effects on this structure information. If you
Yeah.
have topic and focus, everything changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is really important because we it's totally different if you look to a word order in a written sentence, or it depends on the gender. For example, in indigenous languages, if they are telling you a story or if they are saying some steps for a recipe, for example, all the syntax change. So
Yeah.
we can say just more about on this movement to the left periphery, or or at least the focus and top,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
phrases on the left periphery and also this to the right.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the case, well, I don't know for let's say Amerindian languages, but for the African languages that I work on, so the Kwa languages, and also to some extent for the Bantu languages. So what you see is that when you have new information, whether that information is brand new or whether it's contrastive, and when you have old information, so that's topic, then typically, at least for the Kwa languages, you see these markers popping up. And you see this not only inside the clause, so not only inside, let's say, the verbal domain, but you also see it inside the noun phrase.
yeah.
And that brings in something that I didn't talk about, which I think is extremely interesting, because usually we think about information structure by just looking at the clause, right?
Yeah.
But actually, these languages, deal with information structure already within the noun phrase.
Wow.
And what is interesting is that in these languages, we don't have, definite articles of the Indo-European, let's say of the, I shouldn't say Indo-European, but of the Romance and Germanic type.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have is actually some particles which typically tell you if something is old or if that thing is new, right? So
So
of
it's
course, if I'm
really
giving
related
you,
to informational structure.
yeah, because these are bare noun languages. So
Yeah.
in Gungwe, for example, I can say John bought table, right? If I just assume that, that, John is going to buy a table, I won't
Yeah.
mark it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So, but if I start marking it, then it means that I'm pointing your attention to, certain things. And typically I will mark it if I I'm sort of telling you that there is something important about the referent that I want you to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So what you see in the literature is that the vast majority of the literature call these things definite articles.
Because of this presuppositional effect, maybe, and because we
Exactly.
have
Yeah.
definite article in Romance
Yeah.
and Germanic
Yeah.
languages,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
this is the way
Yeah.
you translate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Okay.
and I think this is some of the problems, all right? So clearly, when we're talking about information structure and we're talking about movement, it's not just something that is happening magically inside the clause. It's actually something that is already happening within the noun phrase, and how you then integrate the noun phrase inside the clause. So
Okay.
the idea is that the noun phrase that you're using has certain properties which makes it possible for this noun phrase to occur in some positions in the clause when it is a topic or a focus.
That's
So
really nice. Yeah.
yeah, so the point here then is, working on the Amerindian languages with these kind of ideas, we again have to, start from scratch.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. That's,
and, and,
yeah. What
and
I
we,
usually say, yeah, to my students here when we are looking to data from, for example, languages
yeah,
or
yeah,
Filipino languages or Arawakan languages, is that we have glasses to translate to our language.
yeah,
So we
yeah,
start looking to definite articles, plural markers, things that matter in Romance languages.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
yeah, this is really nice. Thank you.
yeah.
There is a question here from Jussara Abraçado. Ask him about uh, tonal phrases emerge from syntactic phrases.
Yeah.
Is there evidence that the children first acquire tone?
Tones, yeah. Yeah,
Would that be different with tonal languages or
yeah,
intonation? So
yeah,
I think the questions, yeah, is syntax first? This
yeah.
is
Well, I mean, this is a very interesting question, and I was laughing because I was attending a talk right before this talk, and so this was a talk given by a Dutch colleague, talking about phrasal intonation in Dutch and how you assign stress and stuff like that. And the question came up again, right? So why do we have these tonal phrases? And which is a question of learnability, right? So what is it that children pay attention to, to sort of realize, oh, what these people are, producing is not just noise, it's meaningful. I mean, they have to have a discovery procedure. And then the question is it phonology or is it syntax? But if you followed what I was saying clearly, if the phonology, at least when it comes to these tonal phrases, is conditioned by syntax, then of course it's syntax that the child is acquiring. So remember, I whistle this sentence, right? I say, and we know that there are whistle languages, right? We don't want to call those languages, tonal, phonological languages, right? You see what I'm trying to say? Because, the fact that people can whistle and convey information shows that they are not just using phonology. They are using, the typical
structure.
thing that they are
Yeah,
using structure. Yeah.
yeah,
So the child basically probably figure out that, oh, there is not just intonation, but the intonation is weird in the sense that, it goes downdrift, and then the downdrift is complex in that it contains, units. And from there, the child could say, oh, yeah, but these units are even complex inside them, right? So I think, it's not, let me put it this way, it's not syntax first or phonology first. It's really the two happening. And this is what language is about. Language is about the interfaces. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, my last questions would be on the semantic interface
Yeah.
because, of course, when we see this tonal phrases, it's really appealing to see the interface between phonology and syntax. But
Yeah.
I'm especially interested on the semantic interface. So if you can just say a few words on this topic, and then I'll be very happy.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, just as I said, if you take the whistle languages kind of analogy, So there you actually don't have words, right? You only have the melody, and people still communicate. So it's clear to me that what is being communicated is actually not the melody. It's how that melody is arranged with another, so how it contrasts with another melody, right? And that
Yes.
contrast is given to you by syntax. So for me, the syntax semantics interface here is how you first identify the, the melodic kind of contracts and how that maps onto certain meaning. And of course, I guess, what happens here is that we might have, identification of meaning at different level. Probably in a language like Gungwe, where you have downdrift, it's also typically the case that what comes first is the topic. So you will first have, a kind of contrast between topic and comment. But then
Mhm.
we know that the comment can contain the focus. Then you have another contrast between the focus and the background. That is already giving you, points to semantics, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think this is how it works. But again, remember from my talk that I'm saying we should do this together. We
Yeah,
should push this way of doing things. And right now, I think we are not learning from these languages, and that's the part which for me is a little bit sad. We are not really taking these languages seriously to
yeah, yeah.
basically to mean, well, these languages are telling us something. They are telling us that we have to change our ways of, first describing languages in the first place.
Describing, yeah, and making theories about them,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you so much for
Thank
this
you.
wonderful talk, Professor Enokabo. I was waiting for Professor Ricardo until now. I think that he had a problem. So we
Okay.
are going to end this session now.
Yeah.
And thank you again for accepting our invitation from UFI here in Niterói.
Yeah.
And it was really nice to meet you.
It was really nice to be here. Thanks a lot for inviting me, and I hope what I said here will lead to some more of your students being inspired and to do things a little bit differently. I'm not saying we should change everything, but
Sure.
yeah.
Thank you.
So
Have a
yeah,
good
thanks.
afternoon.
Yeah, thanks.
Evening, actually. Bye bye.
Yeah. So how do we